Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here, Thistle Gypsy, sharing this book with you, The Way of the Shaman, and it is by Michael Harner. So, I'm going to be critical of this book, not because I know anything about The Way of the Shaman. Definitely Michael Harner knows much more than I do. But because of the way the book is used or treated. So let me talk a little bit about the book in general. So this is considered, I don't know if it's considered a must-read by everybody, but an important book. In regards to Western people understanding shamanism and the potential of shamanism to heal and the basis of it. And that is because Michael Harner is an anthropologist, I believe, who went native, as they say, and was curious enough to ask to be put through the initiation process, and in so doing, learned a lot. And a lot that he considered to be of value on the other side of it. So, this book is not a book intended for anthropologists. I think it's intended for lay people. It does have a lot of notes, and those are references that he is referring to for those notes. So it does have a scholarly aspect to it. Preface references, a bibliography, so even though it's intended for the general public, you see that bibliography is quite extensive, there are scholarly aspects that have been retained in terms of the information. I'm looking at a kind of a disclaimer here. So this is being published under New Age. I don't know if you can see that actually, or if I can even get the camera to see it. New Age Psychology. That's the classification of the book. The original copyright was in 1980. HarperCollins, I think it has remained in continuous publication. But his experiences that he talks about in this book were from much earlier than that. So the disclaimer says, the shamanic way of healing presented in this book should not be considered an exclusive method of confronting medical problems. It should be viewed as an adjunct to orthodox medical or psychological treatment unless contrary medical advice is given. And I think that's true of anybody who engages in shamanism, that they have that attitude. So I think this is worth reading one time. That's my attitude. It's worth reading one time. Because he does talk about his actual experiences, but he also, as an anthropologist would, he sprinkles, he's bringing in all kinds of traditions. So here we have a reference to the Hopi. There are references to Native American tribes in the northwest of the U.S. There's Lakota reference here. The majority of his actual experience as an anthropologist was in South America. Was it Ecuador? And somewhere else, I can't remember if it was Peru. There's the Canibo. Anyway, in South America is where he had his most intense experience. And, considered to, continued to both study shamanism in various parts of the world, and also founded the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, whose goal, at least at some point, I don't know if that's still its mission at this point. I think it is, but you would need to check them out. And again, that's the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. Sorry for the glare. Foundation for Shamanic Studies. Is to locate endangered shamanic practices throughout the world, and by endanger meaning that there are very few people who are retaining the knowledge, to pass it on and to provide support and funding to be able to extend that knowledge or capture that knowledge in some way, to extend the tradition, to keep the tradition alive. So the Foundation for Shamanic Studies has a broad goal in the world to support shamanic practices and traditions. And one of the ways they do that is by offering classes in something that is called core shamanism to people in the United States or other first world cultures that are societies that have been alienated from shamanic practices, and whose members, whose citizens have the financial capacity to pay for classes. So when we're paying for classes, we're supporting the shamanic practitioner that is, well, so I don't know that the classes, because I think that the payment for the classes actually goes to the shamanic practitioner. So I suppose we'd have to get a membership in the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. I don't know if the teachers then give a portion of their the money that they collect from students to the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. But I would hope that there would be some flow from the students to that center. In other words, that it's a way of funding the preservation of traditional shamanism or traditional shamanic practices. So the Jivaro, again, South America, there's something here referring to Australian. Somebody who's observed something in Australia. So, I mean, it's just kind of all over the place a little bit. And so when I talk about core shamanism, and I'm not a good person to represent it because I haven't been through the classes, but my understanding of that idea is that Harner took, looking broadly at a lot of different shamanic practices around the world, he noted that they tended to have certain things in common. And so classes in core shamanism are simply teaching some of the very the common techniques across shamanic cultures, the things that tend to be true in most shamanic cultures, and how things have are done, techniques that are used kind of throughout the world within shamanic traditions. So that was kind of his contribution, you might say, is to focus in on those core things and then advocate teaching people what these things are, kind of demystifying in some ways, so that it's more accessible to a broader group of people. And, you know, there can be controversy around that, but I don't have any controversy. Yeah, I don't feel controversial about it. I think it's valuable for what he's doing. It's brought information to me that has helped me understand some of my experiences, helped me extend or expand my experiences. So I'm definitely grateful for that. I'm grateful to be alive in a time where this is happening. I mean, but you can't really call it popularizing, because still there are very few people who would have any idea what you were talking about if you were to say that you were training to be a shaman or you're taking classes to be a shaman. And I wouldn't blame anybody for looking askance, you know, if you were to say that. Because probably first they'd say, what is a shaman? And who do you think you are that you're a shaman, if that's what a shaman is? You know, shouldn't you have to go to somebody that's from a native culture in order to take classes or become a shaman? I mean, I wouldn't blame anybody for asking those questions. But Michael Harner was trying to overcome, I think, some cultural bias and open people up to what he calls the shamanic state of consciousness, the SSC. So this book, the first 2 chapters, which ends up being the first 50 pages, are primarily, if not exclusively, his experiences, his knowledge as an anthropologist, his experiences, etc. And there's even an introduction prior to that that is 27 pages long. And I think you have to read the introduction as well. And then a preface to the 3rd edition. Actually, it starts on page 13, so of that 27, it's only half of that, really. A quote from somebody, again, from Aboriginal Men of High Degree by the late Australian anthropologist. So the book starts with a quote about Aboriginal medicine men. So it's definitely, although his personal experiences are primarily with two South American native nations, tribes, indigenous groups, he's adding a lot from other, in terms of knowledge, sharing knowledge and things that have happened in other cultures. But it feels a little, even though it has chapters, it feels a little, how he's throwing a lot of things in. Again, kind of like a scientist or an anthropologist. It's like, I have to prove that this is the way things are, or I don't want to suggest anything that isn't grounded in research. So he's keeping that sort of thing, and so he keeps throwing in practices and where they come from. And that prevents this, both his personal experience, his direct personal experience, and the extent to which he includes other people, other traditions beyond his direct personal experience that he had here, that prevents this from being a guide for people. It's an interesting book. Again, I think it's anybody interested in shamanism should probably read it once. But it's not a guide and it's not a textbook. And so my problem with it is that it is treated as though it is a guide or a textbook by people who are teaching core shamanism. At least that has been my experience. I haven't taken a class, but the person that I have dealt with and from the website, it's like the first thing you have to do is you have to read The Way of the Shaman. But it's not a textbook. It's not instructive to me. It's not an instructive book. And so that's the problem that I have with it, is that it's treated by the people in the United States that I'm most likely to get any sort of training from. This is treated kind of as though it is a guide or a textbook, when it's not. So that's my problem with it. So let me read the table of contents here. So we have acknowledgments, preface to the third edition, introduction, discovering the way, and this discovery is Michael Harner's discovery. And chapter 2 is the shamanic journey, an introduction. And again, to me that was mostly his experiences. And then chapter 3, we finally get into some places where I was marking little lines I put on the side. I don't know, I guess you can't really see them. You can kind of see it here. Little lines I put at the side that's like, this is worth returning to. And so that's shamanism and states of consciousness. Chapter 4 is power animals. Chapter 5, the journey to restore power. Chapter 6, power practice. Chapter 7, extracting. So these sound useful, but I don't find them particularly useful. I can certainly be accused of being dense, but I'm not usually known for being somebody who's slow to understand something. Chapter 7, extracting harmful intrusions. And then we enter the afterword at page 175. So if I were to take 50 pages off of this, it's 125 pages, and I would say even less of what is useful in terms of practices. And I think what is making me, and then it has Appendix A, drums, drumming CDs, and training workshops. Appendix B, the hand game of the Flathead Indians, which is gone into in some detail, I'm guessing in chapter 6, I can't remember, because it is about developing intuitive power. Yeah, and then we're into the notes section. So one of the things, as I was saying, that makes me a little snarky after reading this a second time, is that the shamanic practitioner that I had employed to help me with something, keeps encouraging me to take the class, any class. She doesn't care if it's with her or for somebody else. She just wants me to take a class. And I've gotten I've gotten some pretty strong nudgings from a Facebook group that I really need to get some training if I'm going to go any further, if I'm going to do anything. Otherwise, I should just stop doing it. But she had mentioned something, and, you know, again, suggesting the class, and said, you need to read The Way of the Shaman. And it's like, I already read The Way of the Shaman. Yeah, I get. I get. You know, the shamanic state of consciousness, the journey, you know, that. But she was leading me to believe also that there would be an explanation in this book for something that happened while we were having a session. And that wasn't the truth at all. There's nothing in here that addresses very much that's specific to me. It doesn't strike me as being terribly specific. Some practices like the extraction, and, you know, I think that is fairly, he gives some specifics about that in particular. And anecdotes from other people's experiences, he provides those. Yeah, so I feel like I said, people should read this, but don't take it for something that it isn't. It isn't a guide, it isn't a textbook. And I assume that I will someday take a class in core shamanism, if not 2 or 3. Again, my options are a little bit limited. If I'm going to go forward with this, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I feel like there's kind of, because of the prominence of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies and the classes in core shamanism being just about the only way that people are going to further learn about shamanism, or the most accessible way to learn about shamanism within the United States, that there ended up somehow being I don't know how to say this without sounding snotty. So I'll just sound snotty. And this is nothing about Michael Harner, because I don't think he wanted this. But I feel like it's like a cult following, and not a cult in the sense of, any sort of attempt to indoctrinate people. I feel like within core shamanism, because it is sort of generalities or taking from a lot of different cultures and stuff, it's not you're not being indoctrinated, so to speak. You're being taught. You're not being indoctrinated. But he is held as such a central figure that they can't let him go. That he becomes precious beyond his usefulness. Or this book becomes precious beyond its usefulness. So that again, is it useful to read this book? Sure. But there ought to be some book that is appropriate for somebody taking a class in shamanism. And this is not that. And I think it's really unfortunate that the people who have carried on this legacy, I mean, Michael Harner was a teacher. His wife was a teacher. That nobody who's carrying on this tradition feels comfortable going beyond this book, or beyond a book with the name of Michael Harner on it, and God forbid we should touch anything that he has done, and create a guidebook. There are a lot of other books out there, but I wish that when I encounter somebody, again, like the shamanic practitioner that I have used a couple of times, where they could say, instead of saying, read The Way of the Shaman again, or even refer to it as say, well, here is the guidebook that the Center for Shamanic, or the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, has created that, distills the knowledge of Michael Harner, has put it into a workbook format for better understanding, to get a bunch of the storytelling and all of that kind of stuff out of the way. Because I honestly do feel like it needs to be gotten out of the way, whether that's a sin or not, to say that. And that doesn't mean that somebody who's following a very traditional shamanic path within an existing shamanic tradition should try to get anything out of the way. If you're in Siberia, you're learning directly from a Siberian shaman within that tradition, then you need to, I would assume, abide by that culture's dictates. All right, but that's not what this is. That's not what core shamanism is. It's more about providing techniques. And this is full of stuff that is not providing techniques, but is sort of proving that it's real, quote unquote, and proving that it's worthwhile, and proving that it's worldwide, and that these practices are all over. So it's a lot of attempting to prove something, like a scientist would need to do. Whereas it seems to me like you could say some things like, Michael, very brief in terms of, this is based on the experiences of Michael Harner, and his encounters with South American indigenous shamans, which led him to classify 2 states of consciousness. So it could be distilled in a way where a Western mind, which is what this is made for, this book is written for, could say, oh, okay, I see that. And it's like, and if you want to know more about that, then go get The Way of the Shaman. And and there you will find, explanation of Harner's experiences, his direct experiences, and more about shamanism throughout the world. But here we're teaching you what he discovered, or how he's explained things, and we're sharing that with you so that you can learn some practices and then talk more about those practices. For example, like with power animals, which is about the only thing I can claim to have much in the way of knowledge of. And in this book, it talks about connecting with your power animal through dancing and things like that, but it completely overlooks or doesn't dive deeply at all into establishing a relationship with that power animal, and how a power animal is different than, say, an animal archetype, or talking to your power animal, or what your power animal can teach you. It's like, it's not in there. It's just like, this is all it says. This is how you can, it shows how you can encounter a power animal, or how a shaman will bring a power animal back to somebody. so I feel like a lot is left out that a lot of people have experienced since the writing of this book. This book, time did not stop. And the study of shamanism did not stop. And the explicating of how shamans work did not stop with the writing of this book. Or even 1990, which was the edition that I've got here. So why keep using it as though it's the ultimate source or resource or as a training guide is beyond me. So there's my beef. Again, it's not a beef with Michael Harner. I'm grateful to Michael Harner for having written this book, for having created the foundation for shamanic studies, for opening the world up again, the Western first world peoples who have stomped down shamanism, to wake people back up to what shamanism has to offer everybody. And maybe trying to get us over what I would call, I suppose, superstitions around what shamanism is, or what indigenous medicine men did or do or whatever. It's like, we accuse them of having superstitions, but I think we have our own inventive superstitions as well. And I think this is a useful book. As I said, I think everybody should use it, but I think we need to move on. In terms of a teaching tool, we need to move on. Yeah. So I hope someday, soon, people will move on. And I would hope it would be the people at the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, that they would create something that is more of a teaching tool than this book is. To me, this is not a teaching tool. And not worry about somehow, it's like Michael Harner is the sacred person, and you can't do something other than, and I don't know, maybe there's something legal in and I wouldn't fault them for that, really, in the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. It could be that there's some legal language in its creation, or the creation of the courses, that says that, that they are not to deviate from using his books, or teaching exactly, or anything that deviated from what is in his books. Because again, there can be repercussions, etc. This is the United States, so I wouldn't blame them for that. But if that is the case, I think it's a shame, because it leaves them stuck. And as far as I know, unless you were to go to the Native American nations, and I don't blame them for maybe being very careful with who they teach their shamanic practices to. I have no problem with that. And so that's why I say this, because this could be the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, and its courses is the most accessible way for somebody in the United States to learn about shamanism. And so it would be great, given that they have been teaching and supporting the teaching of core shamanism for so many years, it would be great if they could be the ones to create a workbook or a textbook or a student book of some kind that doesn't have the name of Michael Harner on it, except to give him credit for his research and all of the great things he did in terms of shamanism. But that, he wouldn't have to be the author of it, and that it could be a guide, a workbook, a textbook, as opposed to this. And even though I am being critical of it in this one way, like I said, I don't have anything against Michael Harner. I don't have anything against this specific book. It's just about the way it's being used or treated as though it has certain information that it doesn't, or is useful in a way that at least I didn't find it useful. And granted, I need to take a class, but at the same time, any textbook, anything that's a guidebook for a class, I should be able to read it and get a sense. It should be instructive, not just a bunch of information. It should be instructive. Especially if it's teaching techniques, which supposedly that's what Corn shamanism is techniques. That there should be more about practicing than in this book. I think most of it was taken up explaining what is the game that is talked about here. And I've lost my... Okay, so again, there are other books of his that I fully intend to read because I expect that they're interesting, anthropologically interesting, which is great. I won't expect them to be anything like a textbook or a guide or anything. They will be anthropology books written for the general public. Great value in that. I am the general public. So I'm grateful for that. But I would also be grateful for something that would make me want to take a core shamanism course. This does not make me want to take a core shamanism course because I can't see what that course is really going to teach me. I can't see what I'm going to practice. If the core shamanism course or courses in core shamanism are as general as what I find in this book, I don't believe that I would feel comfortable, again, beyond power animals, that I would feel comfortable practicing any of it. And maybe there's no tragedy in that. Maybe I shouldn't be practicing any of it. So there, at the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, there are levels. So there's your basic course in core shamanism, and I think that it doesn't go much beyond. If I'm recalling correctly, I'll put a link to it, just to that organization down in the information box. And so there's in power animals, just the basic concepts, and probably retrieving power animals and that sort of thing. I could see it's only a couple of days, I think. The basic 101 type level class in shamanism, and then there are higher level classes dealing with specific things like the extractions and stuff like that you have to be more careful with, and perhaps be more careful in your application of specific techniques and practices. And I think that there's like a 2-week, at some point there's like a residential 2-week program that you could go through. Expensive, of course, and not necessarily because they're making it expensive, but they're in California. You have to get there, And, you know, you're helping them pay for a facility in California. So I understand why it's expensive. And again, I don't think that the class itself is necessarily expensive as classes go. But again, there's the getting there, there's the missing work, and thus not making money while you're, at least if you're me, not making money while you're away learning about your shamanism. But they do try to make it as, you know, there are people throughout the country, throughout the United States. I mean, if we've got a couple of them here, well, I think the nearest one to me, there's one in North Carolina. I'm in Alabama. There's one in North Carolina and one in South Carolina. And so if they've got them in the South, they've got them pretty much everywhere. But there's still kind of a day's, for me, what would be a day's drive, about 4 hours away from me. So, all right, I'm winding down. I've been babbling here for a while now. So that's The Way of the Shaman. Yes, if you're interested in shamanism, read it. If somebody says, read this because you'll need it for a class in shamanism, read it, because they haven't come up with anything else that is more suitable for their purpose. But I wish they would. I wish the people at the Foundation for Shamanic Studies would create a proper guidebook, textbook for a shamanism class. All right, so that's that with The Way of the Shaman. I just felt like I've read this now for the second time. I don't expect to read it again. And I felt just like that I should share this for some reason. I felt like I should share this. It's partly sharing frustration, but I did read the table of contents so that you're aware. And in some ways, it's like I don't want anybody to go into this book with any expectations similar to those that I had. Take it for what it is. Value it for what it is. You know, I hadn't realized till recently that Michael Harner had other books. So there you go. Check out his other books. They look interesting. All right, I'm leaving it at that. Take care, everybody. You are amazing. If you've stuck with this ramble this far, feel free to leave any comments down below. Good, bad, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if I got some negative feedback about some things that I've said here. But there it is, you know. This channel has my name on it because it's my opinions. It's me. All right, everybody. Take care and catch you again soon. Bye-bye.